Hi, welcome to Chapter 2. In Chapter 2, we're going to be talking about diversity in organizations. Okay, so after studying this chapter, what you should be able to do or to understand more is the two major forms of workforce diversity. You'll be able to talk about this, converse about different examples of workplace discrimination, how it undermines effectiveness of the organization. You'll be able to identify key biological characteristics and describe how they're relevant to organizational behavior, define intellectual ability and demonstrate its relevance, contrast intellectual and physical ability, and describe how organizations manage diversity effectively. So the demographics of the U.S. workforce has changed over the last 30 plus years. Today's workforce is not only more ethnically and racially diverse, it also includes more women and older workers. So wage gaps persist across genders and racial and ethnic groups. However, the gaps have begun to shrink. So I've certainly noticed a big difference in the workforce of today back then when I started working 30 years ago. And today's workforce is definitely more diverse, and there's more categories of people as far as their demographics of race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, things of that nature. And there's still consistent discrimination among many of these groups. And this discrimination can be most easily seen in how these workers are treated and also in their pay. So let's talk about levels of diversity. So while surface level diversity can initially lead to stereotypes and assumptions about others, as people get to know one another, these differences become less significant and deep level diversity such as personalities and values become more important. So there are the surface level, when you look at somebody, their age, their race, their gender, sexual orientation, you can you look at somebody and you form a mental picture of what they're like. And that becomes less significant over time as you get to know them. Then you're a little bit more intimate in their personality traits, their values, and that becomes more important in the long run. So a lot of us unfairly make judgments about people, and then when we get to know them and see that we have more in common than we thought, we see through their surface level characteristics, and we connect to them more on a deeper level. And when you connect to someone more on a deeper level, generally this discrimination disperses because you know that person as a person, not as a stereotype. And in my life, I've encountered many different stereotypes, and in fact, the more people I got to know, the more diverse group of people I got to know, the more I found out that stereotypes are wildly inaccurate. A poor description of somebody based on where they were born or what their age is or their gender. So let's just talk about discrimination for a minute. So this is important to know if you work anytime you go to work, you should really be versed, whether you're an employee or manager or owner, on the types of discrimination. So discriminatory policies or practices is one such area. So to discriminate is to know the difference between things. While this isn't itself a bad thing, when we talk about discrimination, we're usually referring to stereotypes and groups of people and assumptions that everyone in a group is the same. This type of discrimination can be harmful to organizations and employees. Discrimination is one of the many primary factors that prevents diversity. Whether the discrimination is overt or covert, recognition of diversity opportunities can lead to an effective diversity management program, ultimately to a better organization. So getting back to types of discrimination, policies or practices. So any action taken by a person in an organization that denies equal opportunity to performance or unequal reward for performance is an example of unfair policies or practices. So, if you had, an example here, if you had a layoff and you only targeted older employees, that would be an unfair policy. Sexual harassment. This is a big area of discrimination. So any unwanted sexual advances, verbal, physical contact of a sexual nature that creates an uncomfortable, hostile, or offensive work environment. So this is something that where a lot of employees need additional training on, because it's sometimes hard to figure out that line between what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. Some things are clearly not acceptable, and some things are a little bit more in the gray area. Um, Intimidation, the overall threat of bullying directed by members or specific groups of employees. So intimidation and bullying is very common in the workplace, and one of the discrimination types that isn't talked about very much. And I think that if you think about your work history, you'll find that at some point you were bullied. I know that I was bullied quite often, from when the first day of work to, almost every week there was an intimidation or bullying tactic that I came into contact with, either through management or other coworkers. And this has to be recognized, and this has to be stopped. I mean, we've seen a big change in the corporate culture and the culture of the whole country over time, where bullying is not acceptable, and bullying is something that needs to be recognized and stopped. It's a big topic in organizational behavior, as it is in society, especially with the new social and digital media. Intimidation is quite a lot more frequent now, when people can hide behind their computer screens. Okay, mockery and insults. So jokes and negative stereotypes. Sometimes it could just be, they'll play it off like it's a joke. I'm just kidding. But any type of mockery or insults made is discrimination. So joking about any of these groups of people is not acceptable. Exclusion. So excluding certain types of people from job opportunities, social events, or discussions, or any way is a form of discrimination. So, and exclusion is more common than you think. I mean, I think a lot of these things, when you go back and think about activities or events in the workplace, you could find something that can be an exclusionary type of discrimination. And lastly, not acting civil. So if you're going to be someone who's rude, disrespectful, behaves in an aggressive or angry manner, or ignoring other opinions or people, for example, it's not civil if a coworker sends you an email that's of a business or of a nature that is requesting or looking for information, and you ignore it and don't reply back. That's not a civil action. And you'll find in the workplace, and maybe this happened to you even as a student, where you emailed a professor or a staff member at the university, and they never emailed you back because that was just uncivil behavior, and can be in certain cases it can be considered discrimination. Although not answering one email is really hardly a case. But if you found that faculty members didn't respond to any emails of say, female students, well, there's a clear case of discrimination. Okay, so let's look at biographical characteristics. Was there something else I wanted to say about this? No, sorry. Okay, biographical characteristics include age, gender, race, disability, and length of service. So these are sort of part of your bio, like a biography. So this is what makes you up. Everybody has an age, a gender, a race. Well, not everybody has a disability, but a lot of people, you'd be surprised at how many people have disabilities that you may not be aware of. And of course, the length of service. All right, so let's talk about these one at a time. So let's look at age. So the relationship between age and job performance is likely to be important during the next decade for two reasons. First, the workforce is aging. Our biggest population are baby boomers, and they're getting into retirement age. And as the disappointment of pension and retirement systems begin to break down, more and more employees are realizing, I can't retire. When I was young, they used to say you could retire at 55. Then that became 62, 65, and now for me it's 67. So, and then when a lot of people reach these ages, they realize, I don't have enough money to retire. I got to work till I'm 75, which is not uncommon. So this aging in the workforce is going to be a big issue. U.S. legislature essentially outlaws any mandatory retirement. So you can't have mandatory retirement in this country. However, in other foreign countries, mandatory retirement is quite a regular event. And in certain jobs, there can be types of physical attributes that could be related to a mandatory retirement, but age is something that should not be part of that. Physical ability, possibly. Research shows that the older you get, the less likely you are to quit your job. So you're more likely to stay where you are. Where you're younger, you're more likely to switch jobs. But as you're older, you become a little bit more, you grow roots, you're a little bit more stable. And the more likely you are to have a lower rate of avoidable absences. And the more likely you are to engage in citizenship behavior, which means being a good citizen. Furthermore, job satisfaction increases among professionals as they age. However, that may not hold true for manual laborers. But for more what I call S&A laborers, sales and general administration, accountants, salespeople, finance people, marketing people, human resource people, management, they're generally, as they get older, they figure out their work life more. They figure out what jobs they like, what they want to do, and you position yourself hopefully in a job, in a company that you're good with. And your job satisfaction increases as you basically figure out what work means to you and what's the best way for you to work to increase your satisfaction of your work. So the relationship between age and performance is important because as the workforce ages, there may be performance issues just as people's hearing deteriorate or their eyesight deteriorate or their reflex skills. So this is something to keep in mind, that there's opportunity for a lot of technologies to be developed to help aging workers to perform better and to perform at optimal levels, whether it's special types of computer equipment or special types of enhancements to programs to make print bigger, to be able to have closed captioning, different things like this to aid in the performance of older workers. Okay, so gender. So now, gender is, if you look up gender, it's not about being anatomically male or anatomically physical. So gender is a little bit more fluid today. So there are multiple types of gender scenarios. But research shows that combating age discrimination may be associated with better performance for the organization, but then also you have to fold together with age discrimination, gender discrimination. So, for example, certain research may suggest that older women, say women who are 50 and older, are discriminated against more than younger women in the workplace, or certainly discriminated against more than men of the same age, men who are 50 and older in the workplace. So gender and age also are tied together. So the question is, do women perform as well on the job as men? Few or if any important differences, but women in a male-oriented or male-dominated work environments are perceived as less likable, more hostile, and less desirable as supervisors. So this is just based on research. Women are opinions of women in the workplace. Women are so when we say are perceived, this is the opinions of doing surveys and organizational behavior. Women are less likely to be assigned challenging positions. Is an effect of gender discrimination. Women often earn less than men in the same position is a fact of gender discrimination. Women face maternal biases as well, as far as, do we want a woman in that position because she may have children and then she'll need time off, and this is all discrimination. So, this discrimination of women as, their perception, certain people have a prejudice or perception or discrimination against women as being more hostile or less desirable as supervisors, which is, completely incorrect. So the research has shown that this perception, people are perceiving this incorrectly. So, and it turns out that, women are quite effective managers and aren't hostile and in some cases, are definitely more desirable as a supervisor. But the perception of the female gender in the workplace is that they're less likable and they get along less with their employees. So these are things that can really hold back women in the workplace. This discrimination of how they're perceived in the workplace. And you can see this in various political races where when women are running for political office, a lot of things are applied to them that are unfair and not equally applied to the men in the race. So, that back to the original question, do women perform as well on a job as men? And the answer clearly is yes, they do. In some cases, better. But the discrimination can confuse that issue, and certain people will not recognize that. And that is really, what the basis of this chapter is that discrimination is unfair. And you can't treat, the basic idea is you have to treat everybody as an individual based on the individual talents and abilities. You can't base any decisions on a person's employment, their job responsibilities, and etc. based on their gender. It's just not acceptable and not fair. And as a result of this perception that women are more difficult in the workplace, that obviously some men have, that women have been assigned less challenging positions, been promoted less, earned less money for the same work, and really have these unfair biases placed upon them. But the good news, though, is that organizational behavior is recognizing this, and it's exposing it, and it is making the workplace fairer. And recent research has shown that workplaces that treat gender equally and provide the same opportunities and pay for women as men are performing better as a culture and performing better as a company. And that's why managers need to understand organizational behavior and the latest research on it to really be more enlightened on how they manage their workplace. Okay, so let's think about race and ethnicity. So the U.S. Census Bureau recognizes several racial groups: American Indian and Native, and Alaskan Native, Asian, Black, African American, Native Hawaiian, other Pacific Islander, white, and there could be other races in there. Those are just an idea of what they're recognizing. A distinction is also made between native English speakers and Hispanics, Hispanics are Spanish speakers, of course. And studies show that individuals slightly favor colleagues of the same race in performance evaluations, promotion decisions, and pay raises. So the research has shown that when individuals, if you look at individuals who are of the same race and how they treat subordinates, managers to employees, and you see that the research has shown that the performance evaluations, promotions, and pay raises are favorable to people of their own race. In addition, racial and ethnic minorities report higher levels of discrimination in the workplace. Furthermore, African Americans tend to fare worse than whites in employment decisions of hiring and promotion. And finally, some industries are less racially diverse than others. So these are all facts that organizational behavior research has developed. So basically, the U.S. Census Bureaus will recognize at least 7 racial groups and distinguish between English speakers and Hispanics. Now, this research, it has shown that there is a discrimination where people favor their own race in the job situation. And that there's higher levels of discrimination for ethnic minorities in the workplace. There's no denying that. The research is quite conclusive. And African Americans tend to fare less in employment. You could look at this in their unemployment rate, in their comparative wages. But some industries are better than others, depending on, not all industries have the same aspects. All right. Let's look at disability. So Americans with Disability Act requires employers to make reasonable accommodations for people with physical or mental disabilities. So after this act was passed in 1990, a number of individuals in the U.S. workforce rapidly increased. So there was more disabled individuals introduced into the workforce. And the act required employers to make reasonable accommodations for individuals with physical and mental handicaps, such as wheelchair accessibility, as an example. And studies shown that workers with this disability receive higher performance evaluations while at the same time also have lower performance expectations and are likely to be are less likely to be hired. So, the studies have shown that people with disabilities are good workers, but at the same time, they're given lower performance expectations and less likely to be hired, because that's discrimination. So I've come in contact with a number of co-workers who had disabilities, whether it be vision, sight, hearing, mobility, mental, and in other organizations that I've worked with organizations that hire disabled employees, and they found a lot of the research has shown that they stay longer, they work harder, they're have lower rates of fraud or theft or interpersonal conflict. So disabled workers, if you look at the research, compare them to non-disabled workers as a group, they tend to actually be better workers, more dedicated and more appreciative of their jobs, and stay longer in their positions. Well, on the other side of that, they don't reap the rewards of their good work behavior and conduct as far as employment opportunities within the corporation or outside the corporation. So, people with disabilities have a lot to offer corporations, and in certain cases outperform people with non-disabilities. But if corporations don't make the appropriate accommodations for them, that can be considered discrimination. And if employees don't allow an environment where they can be disabled and discriminated against, I'm sorry, not disabled, they can be discriminated against, that's a real problem. And there's a law that where these people can actually sue and employers for misconduct in this area. Not every aspect of discrimination has as strong of a legal precedence as the disability worker. Okay, so biographical characteristics, we could look at, tenure as work experience. As work experience is a good predictor of employee productivity. We know that people with more work experience typically get to know and do their job better. And seniority is negatively correlated with absenteeism. So the people who have been there longer typically take less days off. In addition, as the longer an individual has been in a job, the less likely it is for the individual to quit. So it's more likely for someone to quit a job within the first 10 years if they only work 10 years on that second year than it is for someone who's been in the company for 10 years. So, and you may have worked at companies and you look around and you see there's two types of employees. There's the really old timers who've been there for 15 or 20 years, and then everybody else who's sort of in that 2 to 5 year period. But U.S. law prohibits employers from discriminating against employees based on their religion. Even so, religion is still a big issue in organizational behavior, especially when it comes to, say, controversial topics that are associated with religion. And lately in this country, Islam has been in the forefront of a lot of that discrimination. So the evidence shows that people are discriminated against for their faith. So, for example, right now in this country, they're saying that Islamic faith can be something that has a higher discrimination rate than, say, some other faiths in the country. While federal law does not prohibit discrimination against employees based on sexual orientation, that's an important distinction here. Let me say that again. Federal law does not prohibit discrimination against employees based on sexual orientation. This is something that's likely to change because they are working on laws to prohibit this. Because obviously your sexual orientation, you should not be discriminated against by your orientation sexually. Many organizations have implemented their own policies protecting employees on the basis of sexual orientation. In addition, many states and municipalities have also had laws to protect employees based on their sexual orientation. There's just not at the federal level. So at the federal level, there's a real discrimination against people of sexual orientations that are not considered appropriate. And this is a big problem because these people, they recently gained many rights and benefits through work and in society, and it's just a matter of time for the laws to catch up with companies are doing. So companies are realizing that we can't discriminate in sexual orientation. This is wrong, and companies are making policies that reflect that. It's just the country is slow to develop the laws to support it, but it will happen. And companies are also beginning to establish policies regarding transgender employees. And this is a big issue for schools and companies of transgender employees, where they can be discriminated against. People can have issues with them as far as bathroom facilities and locker rooms, and just ridiculousness. I mean, the amount of discrimination that transgender employees face is tremendous, and their companies are now just beginning to establish policies to recognize this, and the government is way behind on this as well. So it's really up to companies. Generally, the companies come up and they make the policies first, and then the politicians, they pass the law when they see that, okay, well, it's already kind of what society is doing, no harm in creating the law. But politicalness needs to catch up with the organizational behavior, research, and application. So, a company today can be sensitive to the cultural identities of employees and should look beyond accommodating its majority groups and instead create as much of an individual approach and practice and norms as possible. So, for effective managers, they have to look past, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, sexual orientation, cultural identity, and treat people on an individual basis and not discriminate based on these characteristics. I mean, it's easy to put someone in a box and discriminate against them based on anything that makes them different. But it's really a disservice to companies because everybody has something powerful to contribute based on their own experiences. So you unlocking the experiences of these people's cultures, identities, and characteristics, the biographical characteristics, can be a real strength in understanding how to market to similar types of people, how to make products to solve problems for these people. So it's a strength, not a weakness. And that's when companies realize this is organizational strength and they incorporate it into their business, it becomes a very powerful tool for gaining success in business and profits as a corporation. Okay, so ability. So ability refers to an individual's current capacity to perform the various tasks in the job. So abilities are made up of intellectual abilities, the abilities need to perform mental activities, and physical abilities. So ability is an issue that can be discriminated against, but it's a complicated issue because a person needs a certain ability to perform a job, and whether it be intellectual or physical, a company needs to be sensitive to what these abilities are and the limitations, and craft policy and organizational culture where it doesn't become a focal point of discrimination. Okay, so let's look at intellectual ability. So the 7 most frequently cited dimensions making up intellectual ability are number, aptitude, verbal comprehension, perceptual speed, inductive reasoning, deductive reasoning, spatial visualization, and memory. So these are some intellectual abilities that you can break down to these 7 categories. Now, you can understand that being good with numbers is going to help with accounting and financial related jobs, speed and accuracy and understanding of mathematical properties, verbal comprehension, being able to understand what you hear, what you read, and making accurate relationship or deriving an accurate meaning from communication is very important, especially for managers. The speed at which you can perceive things, understand things, your reasoning, whether it's inductive, logical sequence in problem solving, or deductive, a logical assessment of implications of an argument. Your reasoning is an intellectual ability. Your spatial awareness, looking at different position 3D elements and positions in space, and understanding how things can be built or made, and of course your memory to be able to retain information you've learned and faction figures. These are all examples of intellectual abilities. Now, physical abilities we can think of as either there are 9 basic abilities needed to perform physical tasks. Individuals differ, of course, to the extent in which they have these abilities. So we can think about strength factors: dynamic strength, trunk strength, static strength, and explosive strength. These are all, it sounds funny, right? But these are all different ways you can kind of look at strength in the physical nature. There's also flexibility, as far as a person's ability to move, and actually in the flexibility world, there's been a big movement for people to stand while they're working, and they have desks that you can lift up, and so you can move from a sitting to a standing because of people's flexibility issues. Other factors: coordination, balance, stamina. These are all physical abilities that may come into play with certain jobs, such as a firefighter. Okay. Implementing diversity management strategies. Management has to take into account diversity and make everyone aware and sensitive to the needs and differences of others. So a key way of fighting discrimination and fighting against discrimination and diversity is to get people to be aware of each other and sensitive to their needs and the differences between people and their cultures and their orientations and their physical and mental abilities. And the more people know, the better it is for them to act accordingly in the organization and properly in the organization. The better it is for managers to be able to understand sensitive situations of certain religions, maybe of certain holidays and different things, to accommodate and make people feel comfortable and make a work environment that's inclusive, so these people can be better workers, more satisfied, more productive in the corporation. Okay, so let's talk about attracting, selecting, developing, and retaining diverse employees. So this is a big thing where companies want to have more diverse workforce because they know that leads to a better organization, more customer satisfaction, more job satisfaction, and more profits. So don't be fooled. When we're talking about business in relationship to organizational behavior, at the core of it, we're looking for companies to become more efficient and effective and productive to result in a more successful organization. And success is measured in a large extent by profits generated. So that's why I throw that profit term in here a lot, because that's what organizational behavior is trying to do, to a large extent, is enhance a company's ability to make more profits. So to enhance a workforce diversity, organizations should target underrepresented groups through ads and publications geared towards certain demographic groups, recruiting at universities and college with a significant members or students are minorities, and perform partnerships and associations that represent women and minorities. So organizations should also take care to ensure that hiring decisions are bias-free and that career advancement decisions are fair and objective, and have the paperwork and the protocols to document this, that they are fair and objective. And the training is very important for managers and supervisors to make sure that they can make these decisions free of bias. They can recognize their own, be self-aware of their own biases in their decision making and their career advancement of their subordinates. Research shows that individuals who share personality traits with their coworkers are more likely to be promoted. But in the collective societies, similarities to supervisors is very important to career advancement, while in individualistic cultures, similarities to peers are more important. Now, studies also show that a positive diversity climate is related to organizational commitment and low turnover, and this is what's important. So if you have a diverse working culture where your hiring and promotion activities are fair and free of bias, you'll have a happier workforce and a more positive environment. And you'll attract a better group. You're trying to look for, the ultimate goal is you should not care about the differences of people. You should care about hiring the best people to make the best company possible. And you simply can't have that by hiring just one similar group of people that have all the same thinking, same attitudes, and same just too similar, because they're not going to be able to see the reality of the world. And the reality of the world is people are very different, and you need to be as inclusive as possible to be a successful corporation. Okay, so let's talk about diversity in groups. So does diversity help or hurt group performance? And the research shown the answer is both. It depends on the characteristics of interest. So diversity in some traits can hurt team performance, but in other cases it can help facilitate or improve it. So transformational leaders are more effective at managing diverse teams. So diversity can both help and hurt a team's performance. For example, if you make a diverse team of 5 people that speak 5 different languages and are from 5 different cultures, that may hurt some performance initially in getting things done. However, if you are able to develop a way for these people to communicate effectively, now you have a more powerful group that can really bring a lot of concerns and issues to, say, developing a product from all these different cultural standpoints that are going to make it a more successful global product. So managers who are more transformational that realize this can make more effective diversified teams. So generally, if diversified teams are managed properly, they are more effective than non-diversified teams. But they have to be managed properly by enlightened managers and leaders. Okay. Effective diversity programs. So effective diversity programs have 3 distinct components. First, they teach managers about the legal framework for equal opportunity and encourage fair treatment of all people regardless of the demographic characteristics. Secondly, they teach managers how a diverse workforce will be better able to serve a diverse group of customers and clients. That's what I've been saying throughout this presentation. And finally, they foster personal development practices that bring out the skills and abilities of all workers. So what we're saying here is that managers have to understand, first and foremost, what's the legal framework in how they work with their employees and employment opportunities, and how to encourage fair treatment of people regardless of the demographic characteristics. And if managers are able to cultivate a diverse workforce and this diverse workforce will be better able to serve a global client customer base, because you'll be able to recognize opportunities in various groups and cultures of people, and just make the company more advanced in the information and the experiences that the company holds in general. Bringing these skills, that using the diversity of these people gives them certain advantages and skills, knowledge, and understanding that can be used to improve the ability of these workers and the effectiveness and productivity of the company as a whole. Okay, so what's this mean for managers? So 3 variables, biographical characteristics, ability, and diversity programs are particularly important for managers. So biographical characteristics are readily observable, but they have been shown to have only minimal effects on job performance. Diversity management must be an ongoing commitment that crosses all levels of organization. So understanding your organization's anti-discrimination policies and communicating to your employees is important for managers. Assessing the challenges, assess and challenge your stereotype beliefs to increase your objectivity. Become more self-aware, recognize your prejudices, recognizes your stereotypes, and fight against them as a manager. Don't let them get in your way. Enlighten yourself. Look beyond the observable biographical characteristics of somebody and consider their individual capabilities before making management decisions. So don't judge people on some biographical cognitions that you have. Really judge them on an individual basis, which means get to know your employees, get to know their weaknesses, their strengths, and what they're all about. And you'll be better able to manage them and look beyond these stereotypes. fully evaluate what accommodations a person with disabilities may need to help them fine-tune their job and compensate them. Because if, for most cases, people with disabilities, if they're given a certain set of tools to help accommodate for their disability, they can perform as well or better than people without disabilities, just by making small changes to physical, for people with physical disabilities or even mental disabilities. Because remember, a mental disability could be something quite small that, when compensated for, can make someone very effective. For example, someone could have a learning disability where they're not able to spell, and that would really inhibit their ability to write or communicate. However, give a person a software with spell correction, and suddenly that disability is really not a hindrance at all, and these people can become very effective communicators and writers, as a very small example. Seek to understand and respect uniqueness of biographical characteristics in your employees, but be fair and on individual basic. Okay. So summary, let's just summarize this chapter. So we talked about two forms of workplace diversity and gave examples of how workplace discrimination undermines diversity effectiveness in corporations. We recognized stereotypes and explored how they can function in organizational settings, identified the key biographical characteristics and describe how they relate to organizational behavior. We defined intellectual ability and demonstrated its relevance to OB. We contrasted intellectual and physical ability and described how organizations can manage diversity effectively. And to really sum up this chapter, what I'm saying here is that companies need enlightened managers and supervisors and employees that no longer harbor stereotypes or discrimination against groups or individual people within the organization, because that just breaks down the effectiveness of these employees and puts people in situations that could generate lawsuits or make unhappy customers or unhappy coworkers, create an unsatisfactory work environment, and really lead a company down to an unprofitable path. So having a work environment where everybody's treated fairly, everybody's respected, and that people are acting in a civil manner makes a happier workforce, which will be more productive, more free to share their ideas, and better produce the growth and the profitability of a corporation, is paramount in really understanding operational behavior and applying it to the workforce. Okay, thank you for your time for Chapter 2, and I'll see you soon for Chapter 3.